At 14:20 in the afternoon on November 2nd, 1944, First Lieutenant Bruce Carr felt his P-51D Mustang change before the gauges could explain it. The vibration was wrong, not turbulence, not engine surge, not the familiar shudder of speed and cold air. It was uneven and sharp, traveling through the airframe into his hands as German anti-aircraft fire tore into the engine over Czechoslovakia, 200 miles behind enemy lines. 20 years old, 37 combat missions, 5 confirmed aerial victories. Experience did not make the situation easier. It made it heavier. Carr knew exactly what those numbers meant. The 9th Air Force had lost 23 pilots to flak over Czechoslovakia in October alone. Most never escaped their cockpits. Those who did faced a different ending. German civilians had beaten 3 American airmen to death in the previous month. The Wehrmacht sometimes took prisoners. The Gestapo took bodies. Carr did not imagine outcomes. He had already seen them. The Merlin engine was failing fast. Oil pressure fell below limits that existed to prevent exactly this moment. Temperature climbed past red lines pilots were trained never to cross. He had maybe 90 seconds before seizure, not minutes. Seconds measured in engine revolutions, not hope. At 4,000 feet over enemy territory, choice collapsed into geometry. Carr pulled the canopy release, rolled the Mustang inverted, and fell into the freezing November sky. Cold hit immediately, replacing cockpit warmth with exposure that had no buffer. His parachute opened at approximately 2,000 feet, snapping him upright as the canopy filled. Below him, forests stretched in every direction. No Allied positions, no friendly movement, just occupied territory and a 20-year-old pilot descending into it. The P-51D he had named Angel's Playmate struck the ground roughly 3 miles east and exploded on impact. Carr saw the flash before he heard it. The sound arrived dull and delayed, already irrelevant. The ground was close now. Watching did not help. He landed hard in a forest clearing, knees buckling as gravity returned. Training took over without debate. He gathered the parachute immediately, breaking the silhouette it created, and moved without pausing to orient. Stillness invited attention. Movement created distance. He turned west. Direction mattered because it was the only one that led toward France, toward his base, toward anything that could eventually resemble safety. Between him and that direction lay 200 miles of enemy-controlled terrain. The first day he covered 12 miles. No food, no water. Only his flight suit, his pistol, and training, meant to delay the inevitable, not defeat it. He moved at night. He hid during daylight. German patrols passed within yards of his hiding places, boots cracking frozen leaves close enough to turn breathing into a liability. Cold soaked through damp earth. Fog erased depth perception in the mornings. Smoke from distant villages sometimes hid him, sometimes outlined him. Each condition solved one problem while creating another. By the third day, starvation altered how his body responded to effort. Hands shook without warning. Vision blurred at the edges. Simple movements required concentration rather than reflex. He had covered roughly 30 miles, which meant 170 still remained. Distance stopped being abstract. It became constant, heavy, and unavoidable. Hypothermia was possible. Starvation was certain. Capture remained likely. One of the 3 would end it. On the morning of November 5th, Carr reached the point where delay became its own decision. He would surrender, not to the Wehrmacht, not to the Gestapo, to the Luftwaffe. Fighter pilots treated captured American airmen with professional detachment, pilot to pilot. It was not mercy, it was procedure. Procedure increased the odds of surviving long enough for the war to end. He had observed German aircraft taking off and landing from a nearby airfield, a Luftwaffe base. Focke-Wulf 190 fighters dispersed among trees. Ground crews worked methodically. Fuel trucks moved between revetments. The layout was deliberate. This was not improvisation. This was structure. Carr approached the perimeter fence at dusk and selected a position within the tree line that offered a clear view of the dispersal area. He planned to walk onto the base at first light with his hands raised, timing exposure so pilots would reach him before anyone else did. Timing mattered. Who saw him first mattered more. He settled in to wait. That was when he saw it. Two German mechanics finished work on a Focke-Wulf 190. Fuel tanks topped off. Engine run-up complete. Controls checked. Then they walked away, leaving the aircraft sitting in darkness, fueled, armed, ready to fly. Carr did not move. He watched the fighter long enough for the implications to settle without becoming a plan. Surrender remained the intention. Another possibility now existed beside it, uninvited and dangerous. Two aggressive costs. But surrender here carried its own cost as well. If you have ever faced a moment where every option carried risk, tell us which choice you think would stay with you. He had never sat in a German cockpit. He could not read German. He did not know where the starter was, how the throttle logic worked, or whether the guns were loaded. The Focke-Wulf 190 was among the deadliest fighters in the Luftwaffe inventory. German pilots trained for months to fly it. Carr had until dawn to understand enough not to die. By 600 in the morning, the base would be awake. By 6:30, mechanics would reach the aircraft. If he failed, capture would not be brief. Carr waited until full darkness, around 2200 hours at night. The base settled into routine. Guards followed predictable paths. The dispersal area remained empty. He slipped through the fence where rust had weakened the wire. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. 20 yards of open ground offered no cover. Carr crossed it, crouched low, expecting a shout or a shot with every step. Neither came. He climbed onto the wing root and slid into the cockpit. The smell arrived first. Aviation fuel, gun oil, cold leather. The cockpit was tighter than the Mustang. The instrument panel dense with gauges he could not read. Every label in German. Carr mapped the cockpit by touch, repeating positions until they lived in muscle memory. The Focke-Wulf did not have separate mixture and propeller controls. It used the commando turret, a single integrated system that managed throttle, mixture, propeller pitch, and supercharger automatically. Carr did not need to understand how it worked. He needed to understand what it removed. Complexity at the worst possible moment. He found the starter handle, a T-shaped control with unfamiliar text. He memorized its position. Push or pull would decide everything. 4 hours passed with fear remaining constant rather than dramatic. At 5:30 in the morning, the sky began to lighten. Voices carried across the field. Carr placed his hand on the handle and pushed. Nothing. He pushed again. Still nothing. He reversed direction and pulled. A high-pitched whine filled the cockpit as the inertia starter spooled up. Carr waited until the sound stabilized, then pulled again. The engine caught. The aircraft shook violently as 14 cylinders came alive, nearly 2,000 horsepower translating into force. Carr felt immediately. Somewhere on the base, voices rose sharply. Carr released the brakes and advanced the throttle smoothly. The fighter surged forward. He did not look for the runway. Ahead was a gap between two unfinished hangar foundations. The aircraft crossed rough ground at increasing speed. Carr pulled back and felt the wheels leave the earth. The wingtips cleared the concrete by inches. He was airborne. Carr banked hard left and dropped to treetop level. Anti-aircraft guns could not depress low enough to track him. He pushed power and headed west. The commando turret adjusted automatically. German engineering compensated for unfamiliarity. He flew at 50 feet, sometimes lower, dodging obstacles by instinct. German soldiers looked up in confusion as a Luftwaffe fighter screamed overhead, heading the wrong direction. After 90 minutes, the landscape changed. Carr crossed into Allied-controlled territory. Relief did not arrive. American anti-aircraft guns opened fire immediately. Tracers cut past the cockpit. Impacts rang through the fuselage. Carr was too low to bail out, too fast to land, and flying an aircraft every gunner had been trained to destroy. He aimed for his base and pushed harder. The runway appeared ahead. Carr pulled up, chopped throttle, and reached for the landing gear. Nothing. He pushed again. Still nothing. Then he committed. Carr dove for the runway and belly landed at 120 miles per hour. Metal screamed. Sparks erupted. The aircraft slid hundreds of feet before stopping. Silence followed. Military police arrived and pulled at the canopy. Confusion escalated until Colonel George Bickel recognized the exhausted lieutenant inside the German cockpit. The pulling stopped. Carr was helped out. Medics took over. The stolen fighter was studied, then removed. Carr returned to flying within days. Too aggressive costs, but sometimes delay costs more. By April 2nd, 1945, Carr led 4 Mustangs into 60 German fighters and destroyed 5 in 11 minutes. Only confirmed kills were counted. Nothing more was claimed. The war ended weeks later.